So your story is a little bit different. If you could go into it, it's not necessarily from the vaccine. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So go ahead and share us your story.
As a result of the vaccine pandemic, though, I was not able to get that vaccine or vaccination process due to being vaccine injured prior to that pandemic. So there was no other preventative measures for my demographic. Our our government leaders placed statutes that allowed for my entire demographic to be excluded from entire counties and cities. We weren't allowed to dine with other individuals because we couldn't get vaccinated. As a result, a lot of people still in my family and support circle are no longer there because they trusted our government over their own family member who is going through this as a result of the vaccination process. So, where my story began was back in 1997. As a 17-year-old in high school, I decided to join the military to gain funding for college. Back then, the Army was providing $40,000 for college fund if you did 4 years of active duty. So I joined the Army, and 2 months after I graduated high school, I went to basic training in July of 1998. And within 2 months of the first inoculation series of my basic training, I had already was experiencing, at the time we didn't know, but what later on was diagnosed as lymphedema. And I recall this because my fellow service members, as we were graduating basic training, I was wearing a skirt and our pumps, and my legs were huge. I had no ankle definition. And so after I got completed training and I went to the doctor, they concluded, well, it must be tendonitis and inflammation from that. So they attempted to minimize my physical training and did all kinds of different things through profiles. Well, throughout my military career, I spent 10 years on active duty. And as a result, we weren't aware at the time that it was these vaccines that were causing my injury. As we are very much aware, chronic illness can be brought on from many different factors, whether it's genetics, whether it's toxic exposure, whether it's vaccinations or a number of different things. But what our government and our medical community aren't aware of is the vaccination process. And I have very little information of either genetics or toxic exposure. We as a nation and as a global effort need to do a much better effort on continuing research to determine what these toxins do to our bodies. But from my standpoint, I know without a doubt, due to the research and the registries and the screenings that I have went through as a result, I have been diagnosed through the War-Related Injury and Illness Study Center out of Palo Alto, California, to have been vaccine injured by either the anthrax vaccine or the smallpox vaccine. Now, they know without a doubt definitively, I say they, the VA, knows without a definitively with my case because I did not deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan. So I don't have those additional exposures of toxicity of depleted uranium or sarin gas or any of those other toxic exposures that the PACT Act is now covering and that the VA has been researching since the early 90s.
So basically, what you're saying is it can't be any of the Gulf War syndrome or anything like that. It's got to be related to the vaccine. Is that correct?
Well, not what I'm saying. What the VA has been since the early 90s, and they have not been making this public, not even to our veterans. But in the research and the literature and what they are putting out to our veterans through the PACT Act and our Gulf War illness research consortium and many other factors that they have put together through funding, that vaccines are a part of these military toxic exposures. And so, without conducting the appropriate research to determine which vaccines and how many at what time, and is it the ingredients in these vaccination processes that are causing these injuries, we won't know exactly. But what we do know from the literature and the research that they have presented since the 106th Congress mandated they conduct this research into the manufacturer conducting the anthrax vaccine. So let me back up a little bit. So we are aware now that the U.S. government has mandated the COVID vaccine for many different reasons. But what many don't know is that back in 1997, the U.S. Congress, along with the President Clinton's campaign, put together a mandate called the Anthrax Vaccine Immunization Project or program, making 100% of all service members and military contractors get the anthrax vaccine due to a biodefense weapon scare of the anthrax. So you public and perhaps you might remember the anthrax attack scares shortly after 9/11 happened, and the whole investigation of the FBI and determining who placed this anthrax in our mail system. So there's a lot behind both mandates. And the reason that there are so many vaccine injured is when we take on such a large preventative measure and assume that every immune system is going to react the same without other preventative measures, we're going to have more issues. And that is exactly what we saw with the anthrax vaccine back during my duration and continuing to see to this day. From the research and literature that they discovered from the 106th Congress's mandated research, they determined that the squalene adjuvant was placed in some of the lots of the anthrax vaccine given to our service members from the duration of 1990 to current day. We don't know exactly what these lot numbers are. We won't know without either a FOIA request or a U.S. congressional mandate. And of course, without knowing what ingredients, makes it really difficult to determine diagnostic and treatment protocol for these patients.
Well, my concern, Jan and I are both pharmacists, and my concern about these vaccines, and it's come up with the vaccines too, is that there's such a variability from lot to lot, is that there's different ingredients from lot to lot. And that is a concern as a pharmacist. That's a concern. If we can't trust, the consistency of a product, then, how are we going to know how it's going to react in the body?
Absolutely. And that's what it really comes down to, this whole movement that we're seeing now of changing the overall vaccination process for us all. Is we need better accountability. We need to better understand what's in these ingredient lot numbers. We need doctors having these conversations with patients, pulling out the package inserts, ensuring that each patient doesn't have any of these possible counter indications of potential injury, and then potentially giving them a different countermeasure, because not every immune system is the same and not everyone should be treated the same. Just as we can't give the same pharmaceutical drug for the same diagnoses for every patient, we can't give the same preventative measure in vaccinations. We need to have other preventative measures, like during the pandemic of COVID, having other things like I didn't even want to say it because it's such a controversial topic, but there are other preventative measures that our U.S. government has failed to present on many occasions.